ערב טוב לכולם. אלה המילים האחרונות שאני אגיד בעברית. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us here. We're very happy to be here tonight. We're in our outreach public event of that's concluding 3 years of research and a group funded by the Einstein Fund of the Humboldt University, together with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, studying Jewish homosexual modernism in German and in Hebrew literature, influenced by German culture and language. Our group members that are here, here from Germany, you'll hear our lead investigator Andreas Graf very soon, and Lisa Helleman and Janine Afkin, and then I'm having a senior moment of your last name. Thank you. Simple. Ben Wolf are here, and on the Israeli side, we have Dr. Yaakov Helshkovitz, that was the first postdoc that joined our group, and Orit Yal, the historian, that was with us too, Dr. Michal Peleg, and Dr. Guy Ehrlich. And we've been doing archival work, uncovering queer literature, both in Hebrew and in German. We've been investigating options of new readings, as Andreas will be presenting later on today. This group stemmed out of a historical project studying the roots of the LGBTQ community in mandatory Palestine compared to the community in Germany and Berlin, and then expanded into studying literature as well. I think on both sides we found these 3 years very fruitful and illuminating for us. So we're very happy for the opportunity to be able to share a bit of our findings tonight. And with that, so thank you all for joining us here, and I'll pass on to Dr. Amir Engel of the German department in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, that will be presenting our guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be here tonight with all of you. I always feel this place is a little bit like a salon. There's a Gemütlichkeit involved, and there are many faces we know well, and a few new ones. I'm very happy that I got the opportunity to present our speaker, and I'll do that presently. Professor Andreas Graf is professor of German literature at the Humboldt University in Berlin. He specializes in medieval literature and gender studies, which is a combination I don't think I've ever said before. So I'll say it again. He specialized in medieval German literature and gender studies. In 2012, he founded the Research Center for the History of Sexuality. Together with the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, he conducted several research programs and projects, and we just heard a little bit about them from Tamar, about the history of queer Jewish history in Germany and in mandatory Palestine, which was funded by the German Israeli Foundation and also by the Einstein Foundation in Berlin. In 2020, he co-edited together with Moshe Slochovsky the novel Die Juden von Cherut, the Jews of Cherut, by Sarah Rappaport, and in 2021, he co-edited together again with Moshe Slochovsky and Yuval Yonah a collective volume titled Queer Jewish Lives Between Central Europe and Mandatory Palestine. His recent books include a literary history of the mermaid, Meerjungfrau-Geschichten, eine unmögliche Liebe, so an impossible love, 2010, a literary history of male friendship, ein Herz und eine Seele, Geschichte der Männerfreundschaft, from 2016, and an introduction into the beginning of German literature in the early Middle Ages, titled Die Anfänge der deutschen Literatur, eine Einführung. This just came out 2022 with Metzler Verlag, right? Yes. So currently he's working on a project on Thomas Mann's famous 4-part novel, Joseph and His Brothers, from which I'm sure we're going to hear more, about which we're going to hear more tonight. The title of his talk is The Legend of Joseph queer desire in Richard Strauss' Ballet and Thomas Mann's novel. Thank you very much for coming. We're very curious about your talk. It's yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for the briefing and the introduction. Today I'm talking exactly about Thomas Mann, and I would like to say that on the German side we have a project where we have a double approach. While Janine Achten and Eva Hellmann are analyzing magazines and the gay magazines and newspapers of the 1920s and try to unearth unknown authors, Jewish queer authors who have never been canonized. I do the opposite thing. I look at a very canonical author, being Thomas Mann, and I try to do a queer reading of his four-part novel, Joseph and his brothers. And tonight I would like to compare Thomas Mann's novel to a ballet that was produced in 1914 for the first time. And I will ask whether or not Thomas Mann refers to this ballet, and if so, what are the differences between those two approaches to the same biblical story. And it's already late, and we had a long day today in our workshop, so I promise to show many, many pictures. Okay, so my presentation is based on the assumption that Thomas Mann's, if you show the next slide, please. Okay. So my presentation is based on the assumption that Thomas Mann's four-part novel, Joseph and His Brothers, published between 1933 and 1943, belongs to what we call the literary canon of Jewish homosexual modernism in our joint research project, and what I would like to reframe tonight as the literary canon of queer Jewish modernism. It is general opinion that Mann wrote his Joseph novels not only as a statement against German anti-Semitism and fascism, but also as a sophisticated homage to Jewish religion, history, and culture. Mann, who had married into a distinguished German Jewish family, had to deal with anti-Semitic attacks from early on. Since 1907, 2 years after Mann's wedding with Katja Prinzheim, Adolf Bartels, a German journalist and writer, repeatedly claimed that Mann was Jewish, which he was not, because of the Portuguese family background of his mother and because of the decadence of his novels. In Bartels' racist thinking, all Portuguese had rooted in their veins, and decadence was a typical trait of modern Jewish writers. The infamous Semi Kirchner, an anti-Semitic encyclopedia of Jewish or allegedly Jewish writers, artists, politicians, and other public figures, published in 1913 and republished with a new title, Sigilla Verdi, in 1929 to 1931, includes a lengthy article on Thomas Mann, reiterating all the defamations ever uttered by Adolf Bartels. Instead of defending himself against Bartels' attacks any longer, Thomas Mann wrote a monumental novel of 2,000 pages about the biblical character of Joseph, a literary work that in many ways is comparable to Marcel Proust's semi-autobiographical novel In Search of Lost Time, written in 1913 to 1927. While there may be little doubt that the Joseph novels belong to the literary canon of Jewish modernism in a broader sense, the question arises to what extent they also belong to the literary canon of queer modernism. An easy answer to this question is that Thomas Mann was homosexual, a fact that has become widely known since the 1970s, when his diaries were first published. Yet, the fact that Mann was a homosexual writer does not necessarily mean that his novels are homosexual too. In order to analyze how the Joseph novels refer to the issue or discourse of homosexuality, I will have a look at the contemporary cultural context of the third volume of Mann's novels titled Joseph in Egypt, which tells the story of the encounter between Joseph and Potiphar's wife. I think you are familiar with the scene. So Potiphar is a high-ranking official at the Egyptian court with the pharaoh, and he has a wife, but her name is never mentioned. Several documents prove that the biblical episode, which looks heterosexual at first glance, was the recurring motif in German male homoerotic literature and culture of the early 20th century. Next slide, please. Two documents are particularly significant. The libretto of the ballet, The Legend of Joseph, which premiered in 1914 in Paris, and this is a copy of the libretto. If you like, you can pass it around. And the other one is, next slide, please. The other one, and Lisa pointed this out to me only a week ago or so. It's a poem. It's called Joseph, a Biblical Dialogue, and it was published in 1926 in the homosexual magazine Der Eigene, The Unique. In this presentation, though, I will focus only on the libretto of the ballet, The Legend of Joseph. Next slide, please. Graf Kessler, a wealthy Anglo-German count, diplomat, writer, and patron of modern art, seems to have been the driving force behind the ballet, The Legend of Joseph. Officially, the libretto was co-authored by Hugo von Hofmannsthal, but in fact it was written by Kessler. Hofmannsthal notes in the printed version of the libretto, I quote, it's my English translation, my friend Count Kessler has the predominant share in the development of the poetic and mimic motifs. The following transcript of the choreographic whole originated from his hand. Next slide, please. Kessler had been inspired by the Russian dancer Vaslav Nijinsky, who had become famous with his roles in ballets such as Scheherazade in 1910 and Afternoon of the Faun in 1912. In February 1913, Kessler met with Sergei Diaghilev, a Russian ballet impresario and founder of the Ballet Russe, the Russian ballet company that started in Paris and toured all over Europe. Edward Gordon Craig, an influential English actor, director, and scenic designer in London, and Vaslav Nijinsky, and introduced to them his idea of a ballet dealing with Potiphar's wife's attempt to seduce Joseph. During this meeting, Craig came up with the idea that Nijinsky should appear in the ballet as both a man and a girl alternately, and this is an idea that was dismissed later on, but hints at the dance's androgyny. 1 year later, in March 1914, Kessler wrote in his diary about a rehearsal for the premiere in Paris. Richard Strauss had already composed the music, and Nijinsky had been replaced by Leonid Miasin or Masin, an 18-year-old ballet dancer of Russian descent. And Kessler writes in his diary, next slide, please. This is again my translation. In the morning to Miasin's rehearsal, he danced parts of the dance of Joseph, especially the first dance, which choreographer Michael Fokine composed as a pastoral. Miasin does not have the powerful leap of Nijinsky, but the grace of a butterfly. He seems to float lightly over flowers. His strong, full, even legs contrast strangely with the delicate, still boyish upper body. And you can see how he scans the body. This is fitting for the role of Joseph. He moves like a young, still half-wild, graceful steppe animal. Much of the role he will perform much better and more natural than Nijinsky, however, not the unearthly radiance that surrounds Joseph. Although the production was not a big success, the ballet was also produced in the following years in Vienna, Berlin, and other cities. Despite the heterosexual plot, the homoerotic subtext of the ballet seems to have been quite obvious to the audience. Next slide, please. After the premiere in Vienna in 1922, the theater critic of the Arbeiterzeitung, the working class newspaper, wrote a lengthy review pointing out that the ballet was a homosexual affair. Next slide, please. The Semitic poets Hofmannsthal and Kessler mean it terribly chaste and sacred. It is only a pity that in order to express its chastity, all lechery and perversity is necessary. This legend of Joseph has turned the biblical Joseph, who refuses to be seduced by Potiphar's love-craving wife, into a richly homosexual affair. First, women dancing among themselves, veiled, unveiled, regularly in deepest lust. Then, men dancing among themselves, naked, half-naked. Finally, boys dancing with their playmate Joseph, who is an exemplary holy dancer. He dances as a slave exhibited for sale in front of Potiphar's hopeful wife. Alienated, he majestically rejects her desire. How could he not? He obviously does not care for women. Perhaps this aversion and fear for the woman is a good part of what we rightly call chastity in a man, but in the legend, this component is emphasized a bit strongly. The transformation of the dungeon into which the biblical Joseph is thrown until his liberation into a torture scene with fire and iron also corresponds to the sexual feeling of abnormality. This is undeniably a great theatrical effect intended to whip the nerves of modern society. An angel in silver armor finally frees Joseph and leads him to the blisses of a womanless existence. This review, as you have noticed, is quite homophobic, but I have to say it does have a point. So let's have a look at the libretto and the composition of this play. And I was able to get digitized copies of a series of drawings of lithographies produced for the production in Berlin in 1921. It's kept in the City Museum of Berlin, and I will retell the story and at the same time show you the promised pictures. So the first act, next please. The first act shows Potiphar and his wife sitting on a throne, paying a sheikh for the goods that they bought from him. Then Potiphar's court is entertained by two performances. Next, please. First, a group of women performs a marriage dance. The bride is unveiled by the women dancing around her, and then performs the dance of Shulamit, the bride of the biblical Song of Songs. The next scene shows a group of men performing a boxing fight that becomes more and more violent until it is topped by Potiphar's soldiers. While these two scenes illustrate female and male homosexuality, the following one shows young Joseph, who is offered as a slave to Potiphar and performs a ritual dance demonstrating his desire for God. The structure of the first act suggests that Joseph is meant to be a character combining both female and male features. When he is first brought to the stage, he is sleeping and covered by a cloak. When he awakes, the cloak slides down, and Joseph, naked except for a long cloth made of fur, begins to dance. A young man belonging to Potiphar's court is so deeply moved by Joseph that he sobs and covers his face, seemingly overwhelmed by the dance's beauty. This is just a small detail in the periphery of the story, but it's important to mention it. Next, please. While the first part of the ballet focuses on homosexuality and androgyny, the second one presents the confrontation between a woman and a man, Potiphar's wife and Joseph. Again, there are references to homoerotic desire. In the first scene, Joseph is sleeping again and dreaming of an angel approaching his bed. Then Potiphar's wife approaches him, wakes him up and kisses him. When Joseph rises and tries to ward her off, his cloak slides down again like in the first act. Frustrated by her failure to take possession of Joseph, Potiphar's wife turns the situation around and accuses him of trying to rape her. Joseph is arrested, put in chains, and about to be tortured to death when the angel of his dreams reappears. Joseph is transfigured, and the angel takes him by his hand and leads him into the open while the sun rises and the chorus of angels starts playing music and singing. While Joseph is being rescued, Potiphar's wife strangles herself to death with her necklace and is covered by a black veil. Again, the structure of the scene supports the homoerotic dimension of the ballet. The figure of Potiphar's wife is paralleled by the figure of the angel. When Potiphar's wife is approaching Joseph, the latter is dreaming of an angel approaching him. In the end, it is the angel who succeeds in taking Joseph with him. While Potiphar's wife fades away, she is being caressed and kissed goodbye by one of the female slaves. That is another small scene in the periphery. Thus, the bond between Joseph and the angel is paralleled by the bond between Potiphar's wife and her handmaid. The legend of Joseph is an excellent example of what is often called camouflage or masquerade in literary theory. Camouflage means that the actual meaning of the narrative is veiled, but at the same time asking to be unveiled. So it's a play of concealing and revealing. In the ballet, The Legend of Joseph, the invitation to detect the hidden message is supported by the scenes in which male and female characters are being veiled and unveiled on the stage. In both parts of the ballet, Joseph's cloak slides down and reveals his body. The scenes can be read as metaphors for the hermeneutic act of revealing the naked truth of the ballet, which, as it turns out, is represented by a naked voice. At the same time, the ballet shows a misogynist tendency. Potiphar's wife is presented as a witch and demon. She is unable to control her emotions, falsely accuses Joseph of a crime. She actually tries to commit herself and delivers him to torture and death. In a preface to his libretto, Kessler argues that Joseph's resistance against Potiphar's wife anticipates his heroic future as an adult man. Next slide, please. As it seems, Kessler subscribes to the homoerotic cult of male youth as practiced by masculinists of their time, such as Adolf Brandt, the publisher of the homosexual periodical Der Eigene. In 1926, as I mentioned before, a literary text written by William Quigg was published in Der Eigene. The text turns the ballet scene in which Potiphar's wife approaches Joseph into a poetic dialogue. While activists of the time, like the sexologist Magnus Hirschfeld and the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, advocated the decriminalization of male homosexuality, the masculinists around Adolf Brandt, shying away from the discourse of homosexuality, celebrated male friendship, male athleticism, and ancient Greek culture. Another question is how the libretto deals with the notion of Judaism. As far as I see, there is no hint that Kessler pursued a pro-Jewish agenda. The ballet presents the binary opposition of Israel and Egypt, combined with the oppositions of purity and decadence, male chastity and female lust, as an orientalizing fantasy. And what you can see here are also drawings which were produced for the premiere in 1914 in Paris. In his stage direction, Kessler writes, decoration and costumes of the legend are throughout in the manner of Paolo Veronese, thus following in style and fashion the period around 1530. While the Egyptians wear Venetian costumes, Joseph and the merchants who bring him to Potiphar wear Oriental costumes of the 16th century. End of quote. Joseph's origin as a biblical character is obscured by the fact that he wears Oriental garments of the 16th century, at least until, next slide, his coat slides down and reveals his almost naked body. Joseph is an orientalized object of male homoerotic desire, a fantasy that fits well to the Orientalism, colonialism, and exotism of the Wilhelmine era. And now I would like to come to Thomas Mann and his Joseph novels. Was Mann aware of the ballet when he was writing Joseph and his brothers? Between 1926, when he began composing the third volume, and 1936, when he finished the third volume, Joseph in Egypt, the ballet was still present in German, Austrian, and Swiss opera houses. There were productions in 1921 in Berlin, 1922 in Vienna, 1924 in Leipzig, 1927 in Hanover, 1933 in Augsburg, and 1936 in Zurich and Vienna. And the printed libretto was easily available at that time. It seems rather unlikely to me that Thomas Mann had not taken notice of the ballet, even more so since cultural protagonists of the time, such as Hugo of Hofmannsthal and Richard Strauss, had participated in its making. Unfortunately, we cannot check Mann's diaries since he burned the volumes covering that period of time. The commentators of the recently published Frankfurt edition of Mann's novel, and they add 2,000 pages of commentary to the 2,000 pages of the novel, they ask the same question and they come to the following conclusion. Next slide, please. It is questionable, at least for the time in question, to what extent Thomas Mann took note of the fact that a decade earlier, one of his most important artistic antipodes, Richard Strauss, in collaboration with Graf, Kessler and Hugo von Hofmannsthal, had composed a Joseph legend as a dance poem. The ballet plot of Kessler and Hofmannsthal points in a completely different direction than Thomas Mann's novels. In its total aestheticization of the material, it certainly did not influence the latter. According to this commentary, an influence of Mann's novels is questionable because both plot and style point in completely different directions. They also emphasize that Richard Strauss was an artistic antipode to Thomas Mann. To me, it seems more important, though, that the libretto was written by Graf Kessler, who, like Thomas Mann, was both a homosexual man and a public cultural figure at that time. A comparative reading of the libretto and the novel Joseph in Egypt seems to be the most promising approach to analyzing the relationship between these two works. In the following part of my paper, I will focus on two scenes. First, Joseph's first encounter with Potiphar, and then Joseph's fatal encounter with Potiphar's wife. First, Joseph's encounter with Potiphar. In the ballet, Joseph is introduced to Potiphar and his wife as an almost, as I have mentioned before, naked boy, covered only by a loincloth made of fur. This outfit seems to have several levels of meaning. First, it refers to Joseph's role as a shepherd boy. Second, it refers to the fall of man, as told in the Bible. Before Adam and Eve are expelled from paradise, God covers their nudity with, as it says in the Bible, garments of skin. And third, and maybe it's a weird idea, but that came to my mind, third, the scene seems to evoke the literary topos of the noble savage as presented in contemporary novels such as Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan novels, which were written and published at the same time as the libretto. Thomas Mann, however, presents Joseph as a highly educated and eloquent slave working in Potiphar's gardens. In their first conversation, Potiphar asked Joseph whether he likes his job, and Joseph agrees by elaborating on the birth legend of the Akkadian king Sargon, who, like Moses, was exposed to a river in a basket, then rescued and appointed as a gardener. This scene exemplarily demonstrates Mann's interest in the history of religions. He compares Joseph not only to Sargon and Moses, but also to Jesus, when Joseph tells Potiphar that he was born by a virgin. When Potiphar asks him about his country of origin, Joseph answers, He, who is now your property, grew up among his father's herds in the land of Sahi in one of the valleys of Canaan. Potiphar wonders if Joseph's father is wealthy, and he asks, "So your father was a man free of concerns?" And Joseph answers, "He had none, my lord, except for his concern for God, which is widespread throughout the world. It is a concern known to all people with more or less blessing and good fortune. But long ago it was laid especially upon my kinsmen, so that my father, the king of flocks, might also be called a prince of God." Mann pictures Joseph as a theologian and demonstrates that Thomas Mann, had become a theologian himself by studying the Bible and studying numerous books on the religious history of Israel, Egypt, and Babylon in preparation for his Joseph novels. The first encounter between Joseph and Potiphar also illustrates how Joseph tries to charm the high-ranking court official with the beauty of his words. Potiphar is introduced as a castrate who has no sexual intercourse with his wife. They entertain a ritual petrified matrimony, living together like brother and sister. Yet when Potiphar talks to Joseph, he is filled with a warmth that makes his cheek shine red and brings forth the wish to always have Joseph by his side. The first conversation is mostly about the gender of the date palms Joseph is pollinating as Potiphar comes along. This is Thomas Mann's idea. Potiphar asks him whether the tree he is working on is male or female, and Joseph answers, "It is a fertile tree, my lord. It will bear fruit. Whether such a tree is to be called female or male has not been agreed upon, and people are of different opinions." And then he continues. Next slide, please. Oh, and then the next one. Thank you. "Behold, the world is torn asunder in its sex, so that we speak of male and female, and yet do not agree in our differentiation. For indeed, the nations dispute whether the fruit-bearing tree or the bachelor tree is to be called male. But the foundation of the world and the tree of life are neither male nor female, but both in one." But what does both in one mean? It means neither. They are virginal, like the bearded goddess Ishtar, and are both father and mother to what has come into being, for they surpass all sexuality, and their generous virtue has nothing to do with being torn asunder. When Potiphar asks Joseph about the sex of the tree, he implicitly talks about his own gender position as a castrate. And Joseph copes with a difficult situation by claiming that the tree's fruitfulness is more important than its sex. At the same time, Joseph implicitly refers to his own androgyny. Furthermore, his speech can be read as a deconstruction of heteronormativity in general. Once Joseph feels uncomfortable with binary gender concepts and questions them, as the above-mentioned sexologist Markus Hirschfeld did when he developed his Zwischenstufen theory, the predecessor of modern queer theory. Hirschfeld categorized numerous types of sexual intermediaries ranging between male and female. In Hirschfeld's view, every human being is a blend of both male and female features, while the notion of absolute masculinity and femininity are abstract concepts that do not exist in reality. Mann was aware of Hirschfeld theory since he repeatedly supported the sexologist by writing public statements in his favor. In this regard, Mann's novel is indeed quite different from Kessler's libretto. When Mann's Joseph first encounters Potiphar, he is not introduced as a naked boy arousing erotic feelings in men and women alike, but as an educated youth seeking the attention of a powerful official in order to climb the social ladder. In Mann's version, the scene aims at deconstructing heteronormativity rather than reenacting homoerotic desire. In this sense, it is queer rather than homosexual. And now I come to the second scene, Joseph's encounter with Potiphar's wife. In the ballet, Potiphar's wife is introduced as the cliché of a licentious seductress. Thomas Mann, however, creates a full-fledged character with a distinctive psychological profile. He names her Mut Inet, which is supposed to mean mother in the valley of the desert, thus referring to her celibate asexual life. She is Potiphar's titular wife, and like Joseph, she leads a chaste life dedicated to God. It takes her 7 years until she first notices Joseph's beauty, and 3 more years until she eventually approaches him. Mann spends 200 pages to describe the slow process of her sexual awakening in every single detail. She tries to resist her attraction to Joseph and even begs her husband to remove him from the court. A victim of her passion rather than a predator, she's presented as a tragical character. Her attack on Joseph seems to be successful in the beginning. The narrative notes that his flesh stood up and Mut shouts, "Me eni nachte," I have seen his strength. But then Joseph has a vision of his father and flees the intrusive mother figure, a truly Oedipal scene. The commentary on Mann's Joseph novels points out that Mut is one of the many literary figures Mann created as his own likeness. Comparing Mann to the protagonist of his novella Death in Venice and Mut Inet in the Joseph novels, the commentators explain Gustav von Aschenbach, in the novel Death in Venice, is haunted and destroyed by Taggio, Mut Inet by Joseph. What they have in common is the fear that their laboriously maintained order of life may collapse because of the onset of passion. Autobiographically, behind this is the fear of the intrusion of repressed homosexuality, and the italics are mine, the intrusion of repressed homosexuality into a life outwardly well-ordered by bourgeoisie, marriage, and family. The commentators argue that Mann chose a female mask in order to camouflage his homosexual desire. This assumption can be supported by the observation that the name of Mut Inet shares, next slide please, the consonants of the author's name, who was called Tom or Tommy by his wife, M, N, and T. Mut is almost a palindrome of Tom. A parallel between the portrayals of Potiphar's wife in the ballet and in the novel may be that female heterosexual desire stands in for male homosexual desire. The difference, however, is that Kessler demonizes Potiphar's wife, whereas Mann sympathizes with her. Although Mann seems to model Mut after his own image, he creates a psychologically elaborated character, a subjectivity in her own right. In 1936, Thomas Mann wrote in a letter to the journalist Agnes Meyer, I quote, "One must admit, however, that I rehabilitate the honor of Potiphar's wife, who is regarded by all the world as a licentious seductress, by picturing her as a victim of passion." In order to emphasize Mann's empathy with Mut Inet, I would like to briefly mention 2 more scenes. The first one shows how Mut, overwhelmed by Joseph's beauty, bites her tongue and, as a consequence, lisps for a while. The wounded tongue and the lisping mouth refer not only to the split tongue of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, but also to Mut's childlike weakness and need for help. Mann creates another similar scene in which Mut invites her female friends for lunch who have been gossiping about her passion for Joseph. She orders the servants to set the table with razor-sharp knives. When Joseph entered the hall, the ladies lose control over their motor skills and cut their fingers and palms until they are bleeding heavily. Now I would like to come to my conclusion. I find it interesting that recent interpretations of Thomas Mann's Joseph novels discuss the notions of Judaism and homosexuality in contradicting ways. On the one hand, they agree that Mann wrote his novel as a powerful statement against anti-Semitism. On the other hand, they pathologize Mann by claiming that his novel is an expression of repressed homosexuality. Is it true that Mann's Joseph novels are another proof of the literary productivity of the taboo, as Heinrich Detering, a literary scholar specializing on Thomas Mann, called it? I would like to argue that it may be the research tradition of Thomas Mann, rather than Thomas Mann himself, that actually has a problem with his homosexuality. Of course, there are prominent exceptions. Hans Meyer, a German literary scholar who was both Jewish and a gay man, wrote a biography on Thomas Mann in 1980, in which he calls Mann's desire for young men, I quote, a disorder without sorrow, a disorder without sorrow, thus alluding to the title of Mann's novella, Disorder and Early Sorrow. Meyer agrees that Mann weaves his homoerotic memories into his novels, often turning either himself or the objects of his desire into female characters. Yet, Meyer refrains from the assumption that Mann's literary work might have been ruled by repressed homosexuality. Agreeing with Meyer, and by the way, also with Anthony Heilwood, who also wrote an insightful biography on Thomas Mann, I believe that Mann as a writer was as playful with the issue of sexuality as he was with the issue of religion. In my perspective, the Joseph novels are the result of what I would like to call a queer writing position. Writing from a non-heteronormative point of view, Mann deconstructs heteronormativity in his Joseph novels. Familiar with Hirschfeld's concept of what the popular discourse of the time used to call the third sex, Mann questions gender and sexual binaries. In his Joseph novels, he turns the history of religion into a queer mythology. He turns the history of religion into a queer mythology. If date palms are both male and female, if Ishtar is a bearded goddess, if Elohim is a plural form because God is male and female, mother and father at the same time, why then should human beings be obliged to identify with one of two heteronormative gender roles? In Thomas Mann's novels, Joseph is the prototype of an androgynous person and is queer in the sense that he escapes heteronormative expectations. This is indeed quite different from the masculinist, misogynist, and homoerotic writing position that Kessler reveals in the libretto of the ballet, The Legend of Joseph. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I think you've shown us not only a new facet into Joseph and Thomas Mann, but also kind of a glimpse into Weimar culture, but also into another way of reading this kind of cultural environment. I'm sure we have some questions or remarks. We have a few minutes, so the floor is open.
I think the story about the women and their knives, and also the idea that Potiphar was attracted to Yosef, are both ideas I've heard from Mepharshim on the Parsha of Yosef. Like, I think they are Jewish ideas, at least from some scholars.
Yeah.
So, I wonder, the question is like whether, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So you're totally right. So Thomas Mann, he had like a huge library with books about the Joseph story. So he became a scholar himself on the history of religions, of mythology, and he would like exchange letters with famous experts on this matter. He even had an astrological reading of this bird, and then he projected it onto Joseph. So this is all very well researched and analyzed. So, and he read all the other versions of the Joseph novel, and he brought this all together. So that's what I also read in the commentary, that these two scenes were not his own invention, but he found it elsewhere.
Thank you very much. That's rather a remark, and maybe it's helpful to get another perspective on the issue. Now that the medieval commentator Rashi, when he reads the story, he is very interesting. He is a textual specialist kind of, this rabbi. He describes the scene of the seduction. And there is in Hebrew that says, he did these things. And this is what Potiphar's wife is saying to Potiphar, which makes him very angry because these are supposed to be the description of the sexual desires of Joseph, according to Rashi, and then he is put into prison. And then later on, Potiphar is reappearing on the scene, at least in Rashi's commentary, is Potiphar. And as Potiphar, he is the one who is desiring now Joseph. So in Rashi's commentary already you have this whole homosexual scene exposed in 4 lines if you take time to read the commentary. Thank you.
Maybe I was very curious by this intersection of Jewish history, homosexual history, and heteronormativity, right? And this attempt to reread the myth in a way, so retelling the biblical story. Maybe you could say a little bit more about how this was received at the time. Do you do any research? Was this understood immediately as this kind of?
I don't think so. It was very well received. Although the problem is that these novels are almost unreadable because he invented a new language and he blends various languages in order to create something new. So it's difficult to read it, but it was very well received. But what has always been seen is that this was actually an homage to Jewish culture and religion, and it was really celebrated and well received. But I'm not aware that there were attempts to read this as a queer novel, and I haven't found anything about this. And in the commentary, this idea that this could have something to do with each other is kind of rejected. And the only possible approach of the commentary to this novel is to talk about repressed homosexuality. And I think that totally misses the point. And what the commentary is not aware of is that Thomas Mann indeed knew Magnus Hirschfeld and was aware of the theory. So this sexologist background is completely left out. And this has to do, I think, with a heteronormative approach by the commentators. It's a beautiful, learned commentary, and it's very, very helpful. But it shows that it would have been helpful to have a gay and a Jewish person as a commentator, because they would have gotten this dimension. So Thomas Mann is all the time kind of evaluated how correct he is with his dealing with the cultural history of religions. So that's the question that is asked in the commentary, and then sometimes the commentary complains about this obsession with androgyny, but they don't know how to deal with it. And what I was trying to do was to show that Thomas Mann situates himself in a specific historic discursive field, and that he kind of tries to oppose the idea standing behind the legend of Joseph. So this conflict between these two figures, Brandt and Hirschfeld, is kind of mirrored in how Mann deals with Kessler, and this is a dimension that, as far as I know, has not been realized yet.
Maybe I'll just add one interesting fact, and that is the idea that the dated bisexual is all over the Kabbalah. Of course, this is something that Kabbalists immediately grasped and understood and used for their own needs. And we have, so I think it's been a long day. Before we conclude, I think Tamal wants to say just good night, but I will, so I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that stimulating and inspiring reading of Mann and its response to the ballet. To conclude our evening, you got to hear one of the leading spirits of our group. What you're missing out of is just not speaking tonight, is our other leading spirit from the Israeli side. And I want to I'll join in thanking him for starting this group. Who initiated this project from the Israeli side and has been leading it through many years already, from history to literature and to culture. And I think that specifically at this time that we're living in, with the threats that the LGBTQ community is facing, visibility and knowledge are a great source of importance and comfort. So thank you.